And welcome back, rugby fans, to Rugby411. As always, I'm your host. My name is Joshua Shibata. And this is it. This is the week. We are just days away from the 2023 Rugby World Cup. Only comes once every 4 years. So for all those people that are huge World Cup fans when it comes to soccer, you kind of understand the feeling of giddiness I get because now it's the Rugby World Cup time coming around. Also gives me a chance to wear my official Rugby World Cup 2023 Japan jersey, which I am a big fan of. It's not really that much different from the 2019 one, but this is my first official World Cup jersey, so I'm pretty fond of it. And I'm excited. These videos are going to be previewing each of the pools. For those of you new, there are 4 pools, 5 teams each pool, 20 teams total in this Rugby World Cup competition. The top 2 teams of each pool will move on to the knockout stages after they play every team in the pool in a round-robin system, and then you go from the top 8 to the 4, to the final 4, to the final 2, to the Rugby World Cup champion. I'll be previewing Pool D. This Pool D has, of course, Team Japan in it. It's not going to be an easy pool for Japan. There's some really, really good teams in this pool. So even though I'll go into big details over how Japan has done in Rugby World Cups and what the prospects on their outlook are for this competition, as well as I will preview every team in each pool, in each video, as well as go over important matches and make my prediction. I'm not going to predict who's going to win the Rugby World Cup because a lot of things can happen. I might do another video previewing the final 8s, but I will definitely at least give you my 2 to move on from the pool to go on to the knockout stages. So, Pool D, we have England, former Rugby World Cup winners, ranked number 8 in the world. Before I mentioned Japan, ranked number 14. They haven't been that low in a long time, so we'll go a little bit into that as well. Argentina, ranked number 6. Really big, strong team going into this competition. Samoa at number 12. And then new kids on the block, Chile at number 22. They are the lowest ranked team in the entire competition, and this is their very first Rugby World Cup. So congratulations to Chile. Of course, they got into the competition by defeating USA in the qualifier. So again, there was a possibility that USA could have been in this pool, which maybe in hindsight would have been good for me because I would have been torn over who to cheer for, USA or Japan. But anyways, let's go over, and also too, the important games in this competition, in my opinion: September 9th, England versus Argentina; September 17th, England versus Japan; and then September 28th, Japan versus Samoa. And there's a reason why this one I feel is pretty important, and it'll come up as I preview Japan and Samoa. Don't forget, the entire Rugby World Cup will be live and on demand on the Peacock Network. Peacock, definitely a great a great gift to rugby fans. A lot of rugby content on the Peacock. The entire HSBC Rugby Sevens competition is there, as well as Premiership Rugby, which is one of the top competitions in all of Europe. A lot of players, especially from England and Argentina, play in the Premiership, so you can watch all of that over there. As well as Six Nations is on Peacock. So a lot of great competition that you can't really watch too many other places. Absolutely possible from Peacock, as well as, of course, all the stuff that they show on NBC, Peacock, as well as WWE Network is there if you're a wrestling fan. So Peacock, a great value. And if you want to give rugby a try, I got into rugby through Rugby Sevens and then through the 2015 Rugby World Cup because of Japan's performance there, which again I'll go into when I preview Japan. Japan has been part of some memorable moments in Rugby World Cup history. So let's start with England, former Rugby World Cup champions, one of 4 teams to ever pick up the Ellis Cup, which is the trophy that is awarded to Rugby World Cup winners. England, South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia are your 4 teams to have ever won Rugby World Cups. By the way, this is the 10th Rugby World Cup ever done, so that's in itself is a pretty big, phenomenal big phenomenal event being the 10th edition of the Rugby World Cup. Only 4 teams have ever won the competition. England has one Rugby World Cup under their belt. Head coach is Steve Borthwick. He actually came in between Rugby World Cup test cycles, and what that means, if you're new to rugby, basically how coaches work on the national scene is your coaches will kind of start their term as head coach of a national team after a Rugby World Cup. Usually they'll stay on for 4 years, building up to the next Rugby World Cup in hopes of doing better than their predecessor or at least doing the same. If they do great, they'll stay on, they'll renew for another 4 years. Or if they didn't do so well or they decide they don't want to coach anymore, they will usually drop off after the 4 years after that Rugby World Cup. So then the next head coach comes in. Steve Borthwick came in 2022, so in the middle of the Rugby World Cup cycle from 2019, which is when the last Rugby World Cup in Japan took place, to this Rugby World Cup. And that's because, of course, the former head coach of England, Eddie Jones, left under some pretty bad... Yeah, England was just not doing so well. The straw that broke the camel's back, even though Eddie Jones in the 2019 Rugby World Cup led England to the finals, to just come close to winning the Ellis Cup for a second time, ended up losing to eventual winner South Africa. But Eddie Jones' performance in this year's Six Nations competition, 2 wins, 3 losses to France, Ireland, and Scotland. Kind of one of the lowest performances by an Eddie Jones team ever. Kind of broke the camel's back. Eddie Jones was asked to leave his head coaching position, so Steve Borthwick came in. But since Steve Borthwick has come in, England hasn't really been doing much better. Matches that England has been involved in leading into the Rugby World Cup. August 5th, they lost to Wales 20-9. August 12th, they defeated Wales 19-17, but there was a lot of controversy over that game. If you are new to rugby or you weren't paying attention, but during that game, England captain Owen Farrell, who is notoriously known for not having the greatest tackling technique, ended up really hitting a young Welsh player, Tame Basham. This was actually Tame Basham's very first international test match. So making his debut, he ends up getting knocked hard by Owen Farrell, pretty much head-to-head contact, because Owen Farrell loves to tackle with his head and not with his body, which is illegal. And in the end, Owen Farrell got a red card. What the controversy was, and England still won the game, even with the red card. So they were down a man for pretty much almost the entire game. But even though there was the red card, England still won. The controversy was after the red card was given, it was reviewed, and originally the Rugby World Cup committee, the World Rugby Committee, deemed that Owen Farrell should not be suspended for any matches because of the red card. They didn't think anything bad happened, which then the whole rugby community went crazy because it was pretty apparent in the replays and videos that it was pretty bad. Like, it was not... just look it up on YouTube. Owen Farrell red card tackle versus Wales. It's all over the place. And it was a pretty blatant... Like, he literally dove with his head. Like, it's like targeting in football. Like, he purposely targeted the young Basham. So in the end, it was reevaluated, and now Owen Farrell is going to be given a 4-game suspension. So England will be missing the first 2 games of the competition, which coincidentally enough are 2 of the biggest games: England versus Argentina, England versus Japan, which again will come into play when I make a decision on who will win this pool. So they'll be without their captain for those 2 games, and then the next 2 games after that Owen Farrell fiasco leading into the Rugby World Cup, August 19th, England ended up losing to Ireland 29-10, which was a really, really bad game. I saw that game, and England looked horrible. And then the really bad game, losing to Fiji a week later, August 26th, 30-22. And if you watch that game, the score doesn't reflect at how dominant Fiji was, and England looked completely lost. Not a great look for a team going into the Rugby World Cup, the biggest competition in every 4 years. Nothing taken away from Fiji. When you watch my video on Pool C, I talk about Fiji. Fiji looks like they could end up winning some serious games in this competition, upsetting a lot of teams. But man, to have a loss to Fiji going into your Rugby World Cup. Rugby, as I mentioned before numerous times, is a game of momentum. And losing 3 out of your last 4 games going into the biggest competition in every 4 years, the biggest stage for rugby, losing 3 of your prior 4 games is not a good sign, especially then you're breaking in a new head coach. You're not going to have one of your veteran leaders, albeit whether or not he is the greatest player on the pitch, but definitely a veteran leader. You look towards your veteran leaders for leadership, especially because this team is a pretty young team going into this World Cup. So, man, England is kind of limping into this Rugby World Cup. So, again, as I mentioned before, Owen Farrell not going to be on the pitch for at least the first 2 games. You kind of have to look for your veterans players to fill in the blanks for him. Jane George, their veteran hooker, this is going to be his 3rd Rugby World Cup, over 102 caps under his belt. Dan Cole, Ellis Genge, Kyle Sinclair, Mario Itoje. Mario Itoje is one of my favorite players. Granted, he doesn't always tackle correctly, but a very exciting player. You're going to have to look for those veteran players. The Jane George hooker one's kind of interesting because he is the most experienced player for England's front row. But man, if he goes down, the only other 2 hookers you have behind him is Theo Dan and Jack Worker, who between the 2 of them only have 7 international caps between the 2 of them. That's not something you want to see. Hooker is one of the most vital. He's kind of like your center in American football for your offensive line, the leader of that defense. You kind of want that guy to be someone with a lot of experience. So if Jane George goes down, England's going to be in a lot of trouble. On the other side of the pitch, also Billy Vunipola, their number 8, is really, really talented player as well. Of course, then on the other side, in the backfield, you got some issues there too, because no Henry Slade. Henry Slade is one of the most dynamic English players. Unfortunately, he's injured. So you, again, have to look for one of the few veterans you have, Joe Merchant, center, but he's very young. Max Marlins is also very young. Johnny May is probably your most experienced, but he's kind of coming near the end of his rugby career. And then Freddie Stewart is a very young fullback. Now, your scrum half and full half, your scrum half and fly half, I feel the backs of England are probably the most talented unit, one of the most talented units out of all the teams in this Rugby World Cup. Scrum half, you have Danny Kerr and Ben Youngs. Fly half, you have George Ford, and who I as touted as the Prince of Rugby, Marcus Smith. Those 4 are going to be what's really going to be driving this England team, especially in the first 2 games without Owen Farrell. But not having Owen Farrell for the first 2 games, game against Argentina and Japan, man, that might be the factor. That might make the difference. Because also, too, Owen Farrell wasn't in the game against Ireland, wasn't in the game against Fiji. And both of those games were disasters. So, you know, that might lead to some interesting developments, especially against Japan. Japan as a team is always up for an upset. Speaking of Japan, your number 14 team, 2nd team in this pool that I'm going to review. Of course, I definitely know a lot about this Japan side. Head coach is Jamie Joseph. Jamie Joseph was the head coach for Japan in 2019. Came in to replace Eddie Jones in 2016. Last year at the Rugby World Cup. Now, again, the most memorable moment for Japan in Rugby World Cup was actually in 2015, so the one prior to the last Rugby World Cup that took place in Japan. 2015, which took place in South Africa. Brighton it's called the Miracle Brighton, where Japan defeated South Africa. First time Japan's ever defeated South Africa, and it's the first time that a quote-unquote non-Tier 1 team took down a dominant Tier 1 team like South Africa. It was an amazing display of rugby, an amazing display of heart, and it's what got me, of course, into rugby because, you know, go Team Japan. And then the 2019 Rugby World Cup, hosted by Japan. Man, Japan was doing everything they could. Oh, in the 2015 one, Japan defeating South Africa. They were the first team to win 3 matches in pool play, but because of points was not able to make the quarterfinal, even though they defeated South Africa, which was the biggest robbery in Rugby World Cup history. But then, in 2019, in Japan was able to make it to the quarterfinals, the knockout stages, for the very first time. Again, they played some amazing rugby. They defeated Ireland, a team they shouldn't have defeated, 19-12. Then the game against Scotland. Unfortunately, at the time, Typhoon Hagibis hit Japan, and it was really bad. There was flooding all over Japan. Some of the venues that the rugby matches were being played in had to be closed down because there were leaks, there was floods, matches were called off. People were dying too. I mean, this was kind of a serious thing. It was almost close to a natural disaster, but it was almost close to such a bad natural disaster that they almost shut down the entire Rugby World Cup at that point. But they continued playing. Scotland almost demanded that Japan play, because if Japan didn't play Scotland the way that the standings were, Japan would have went on because of the points that they had at that time. So Scotland pretty much kind of demanded that Japan play them and not back out and not be wusses about it. Now, granted, again, there was a lot of controversy about those comments because, again, people were dying. Like, innocent people in Japan were dying from this natural disaster. And Scotland was basically claiming that Japan was just going to hide behind the natural disaster to avoid playing Scotland because they knew they were going to lose to Scotland. In the end, Japan beat Scotland. It was a wonderful game. And that allowed them to move on to the quarterfinals for the very first time. Of course, in the quarterfinals, they got massacred by South Africa, the eventual winners, 26-3. But it was a great, great moment in Japan rugby history and Rugby World Cup history, I believe, as well. Jamie Joseph was the orchestrator of that great performance of Japan, earning him another chance to coach Japan's team in this Rugby World Cup. Now, granted, it's already been confirmed that Jamie Joseph will be stepping down from head coaching after this to go back to his home country of New Zealand to coach the Highlanders, who he's coached before. So it'll be interesting to see what happens then. Right now, though, Japan, as much as I want to believe that they have momentum going into this Rugby World Cup, they are limping along almost as badly as England. Last couple of games have not been good for them. July 29th, they defeated Tonga 21-16, but then July 22nd, they lost to Samoa 24-22. Granted, that game had a red card, and Japan barely lost. But then August 5th, they lost to Fiji 35-12. Whoa. Which it wasn't a very good game for Japan. And then, to make matters worse, the last game before going into the Rugby World Cup, August 26th, they lost to Italy 42-21. A game where I really thought Japan could beat Italy, but man, they got slaughtered in that game as well. The before mentioned loss to Samoa 24-22 definitely plays a factor because they will play Samoa in this pool game. So that's why I put that as a very important game, because Samoa has the momentum over Japan, beating Japan in the prior game that they played a little bit over 2 months ago. So will Japan look for revenge in the game? And in a game that possibly, if they beat Samoa, they could advance to the quarterfinals with a win over Samoa. So a lot of drama in that game is why I put that as an important game. Now, for the team itself, Japan has looked on paper, they actually have a pretty young team. Some of their veteran players I want to point out, of course, Shota Horie, their hooker, 72 caps. This is going to be his 4th Rugby World Cup. You can't not see Horie. He has these kind of pigtails, and he has a very unique look. He's an amazing, strong player. Usually comes off the bench, but he is one of the heart and soul of this team. Keita Inagaki is a strong prop for them. Ben Gunter, a very young, up-and-coming player. He's an Australian born in Thailand, has gained residency in Japan, so that's why he's playing for the Japan national team. He's only 8 caps, but man, Ben Gunter could be a big star for Japan. Kazuki Himeno, who sometimes is captain of the team, is a great number 8. And of course, we have to talk about Michael Leach, the team captain of Japan. He has been the team captain for the last 3 Rugby World Cups. This is going to be his 4th Rugby World Cup. He does have a red card on him, but he will not. That red card will only affect. Actually, that red card will come off, so he'll be all set for the Rugby World Cup. But he is the second most capped player, the second most capped captain of the Japan team, third most capped player for Japan in the history of Team Japan, most of active players, and so 80 caps under his belt, 35 as captain, which is the second most that any player has captained Team Japan. He is a New Zealander Fijian that has gained residency in Japan. But Michael Leach, granted, he's coming near the end of his career with 80 international caps, 4th Rugby World Cup. Not too often do you play 4 Rugby World Cups in your career. So he's nearing the end, but he has definitely kind of found it in a second gear or fifth gear in his career going into this Rugby World Cup. So glad to have him back after his unfortunate red card incident a couple of games ago. Of course, at their scrum half, I believe Japan has one of the best scrum halves in the game. Yutaka Nagare, who is also known as the Little General, and then his successor, Naoto Saito, who is a very talented young player. Scrum half position is really good. Fly half position is also really good as well. Rikiya Matsuda, who's come in as one of the top players to replace he was like the hero of the 2019 Rugby World Cup for Japan, Yu Tamura, who unfortunately retired to become a doctor. Rikiya Matsuda has filled those shoes really well. And then Sungsun Lee, a Korean national who plays for Japan, has also been really, really clutch for Japan. Unfortunately, no Kenki Fukuoka, who is the top try scorer for Japan at the winger position. He will not be playing in this Rugby World Cup. He has announced his retirement from the team. So the wingers and the centers are all pretty young backs. I really like Rota Nakamura. He is usually the team captain of the Suntory Sungoliaths, my favorite Japanese club team. He plays center. Dylan Riley, a very young South African, only 26 years old. He's playing for Japan under residency rules, which means as long as you've been living in a country for about 3 years and you have not played for your actual national team. So Dylan Riley's never played for the Springboks, so he's allowed to play for another team, so he can play for Japan. But then he can't play for the Springboks ever for his career because he's basically claimed Japan as his residency. But Dylan Riley is a really talented guy, just like Ben Gunter. Tomoki Osada. This is a guy who's just kind of popped up in the last couple of games. He's a hard-hitting, fast center. Only 4 international caps, but man, he's won himself. With the games leading up to this Rugby World Cup, he won himself a starting spot. He is a lot of fun to watch. I would definitely keep my eye out for Osada. And then, of course, you have the Flying Fijians in this team, Semisi Masilewa and Jone Nakabula. Both wingers, both young, but they are fun to watch as well. Nakai Bula coming off of an injury, so I don't know if he'll be starting the first couple of games. But Masilewa is definitely exciting to watch. And then, of course, my favorite Team Japan player, Kotaro Matsushima. He is a Japanese Zimbabwean. But man, he is a lot of fun to watch. This is his 3rd Rugby World Cup. He was also kind of the hero of the 2019 Rugby World Cup as well. He scored a hat trick in the very first game for Japan in that Rugby World Cup against Russia. I remember getting up really, really early because I was visiting my girlfriend in Florida, and it was on at like 4 in the morning. And I just, it was so much fun watching Matsushima score that hat trick. But that is Japan. Now, like I mentioned before, they're not coming into this game with much momentum, but almost the same as England. And with England losing Owen Farrell for the first 2 games, Japan has the opportunity to pull off the upset over England. I don't know about Argentina, but they just need to beat one of them. And then as long as they can beat Samoa and Chile, no issue. Samoa, though. Again, Samoa has that win over them just about a month ago, so that's going to play into this game as well. But let's talk about Argentina. Argentina, a team that a lot of people have been talking about. The talks died down a little bit going into this Rugby World Cup, but man, Argentina looks like a team that can easily upset Japan and become that second team to make it up with England. And a lot of people do feel that way. But Argentina, your 6th ranked team right now, head coach is Michael Chieka. He's an Australian player. and the head coach of the team. He's taking over for Mario Ledesma, who, if you hear that name and you're a Major League Rugby fan, you'll know him because he works for the Dallas Jackals now, which is basically the Team Argentina of the USA rugby scene. Michael Chieka came in 2022. He's going to be head coaching for Argentina. Argentina's last appearance in the Rugby World Cup, they did not get out of pool play. They were in the same pool as England, and they lost 39-10. The last couple of games that Argentina's played, in September 5th, they lost to South Africa 24-13, but then September 26th, they decimated Spain 62-3, just to show the power that Argentina has. But Spain, not necessarily a tier 1 country like Argentina is. Argentina did not do very well in the Rugby Championship, which is the biggest Southern Hemisphere competition. It involves Argentina, South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia. Argentina only won 1 game, lost 2. So not a very good performance by Argentina. Top players for Argentina. Look no further than Julian Montoya, the hooker. He is also the captain of the team. This is his 3rd Rugby World Cup. Hard-hitting, smart, fast veteran player. Definitely going to be the guy that this team's going to rely on to lead them to some wins. Thomas Lavani, the best lock in the world by many people's account. This is going to be his 4th Rugby World Cup. Another veteran that Argentina will be looking for. Pablo Matera, he was the former captain of Argentina before Julian Montoya took over in the back row. And of course, we got to mention Thomas Kubeli, who's the scrum half, because of course he's going to be one of the top players for the Miami Sharks, the new Major League Rugby franchise to pop up next year. So he's probably going to be coming off the bench, but definitely if you're a Miami Sharks fan, something to root for in this Rugby World Cup. And then, of course, you have a lot of young players in the back half of the team. Geronimo De La Fuente, Matias Moroni. Love Matias Moroni. He is one of the young, bright stars of Argentina. Lucio Cinti, young center at 23 years old. Emilio Bofelli, Mateo Carreras, Juan Imhoff. And then this is a great one, Rodrigo Isgro. I know him from the Argentinian Sevens team, who have become really strong in the Rugby Sevens HSBC circuit. And Rodrigo Isgro is a huge reason for it. Of course, Marcus Moneta, who is the young prodigy of the Argentinian Rugby Sevens team. But Rodrigo Isgro is kind of like his Robin, though he is the older, so he might be the Batman to Marcus Moneta's Robin. But Rodrigo Isgro, great to see him get a chance to be in the 15th player. So it'll be fun to see if he gets on the field and the pitch. He has that Rugby 7 speed, so he's going to be a fast, dynamic player to watch. But Argentina, again, has the possibility of making some upsets over England and definitely over Japan. Samoa, let's move on to them. Number 12, this is the highest rank for Samoa in the Rugby World rankings. Head coach is Seilala Mapusa, who came in as head coach in 2020. Last couple of games for Samoa, August 5th, they defeated Tonga 34-9. July 22nd, as I mentioned before, they defeat Japan 24-22. So, Japan's looking for some revenge. But Samoa has that advantage over Japan. And Samoa looked really good in that game. And then July 29th, they lost to Fiji 33-19. But Fiji's been really good. Watch my review video of Pool C where Fiji's in. Fiji is a team that's going to win some games in this Rugby World Cup. In the last Rugby World Cup in 2019, Samoa ended their pool play 1-3. They did not get out of the pool stage. They defeated Russia, but they lost to Scotland 34-0, and then they lost to Japan 38-19. So last Rugby World Cup in Japan defeats Samoa. Samoa just beat Japan. This game, like I said, Japan versus Samoa is going to be huge for the overall standings in this pool. 4 players to watch out for. I'm not super familiar with too many of the Samoans, and forgive me if I mispronounce some of the names, but you of course have their captain Michael Alatoa. Only 16 caps under his belt, So a young captain, but he does play for Leinster in the Premiership Rugby. So, not a bad team to be part of. A very strong European rugby club. Chris Vui, who's a co-captain, lock 28 caps. He plays for the Bristol Bears, another Premiership team. So again, they have a lot of experience in rugby, even though they don't have a lot of international experience. Sama Malolo, he is the young 25-year-old hooker. He is really good. Sela Lam, 34-year-old hooker, who's more than likely going to be the starter, but Malolo will probably be his backup. Eli D'Angelo Lelula, he is a dynamic center, 23 caps. And then, of course, you have your scrum half, another young, really talented scrum half, Jonathan Tamoe Mataye, who's really good as well. And then I gotta mention, because he made the roster, one of the top try scorers in Major League Rugby, Ed Fido, is going to be on this Samoan team. So again, if you like Major League Rugby, you got another player to root for in Samoa's Ed Fido, who's going to be on the pitch somewhere down the line. So Samoa possibly could play upsetter, spoiler, against Japan. And then now, last but not least, Chile, who is number 22, the lowest ranked team in this Rugby World Cup. This is their very first Rugby World Cup ever, so congratulations to Chile, Los Condores. Granted, of course, they made the Rugby World Cup because they defeated USA 31-29 on a last-second penalty kick. Yeah, very devastating for Team USA. But again, congratulations to Los Condores for making the Rugby World Cup for the very first time. Head coach is Pablo Moena. He is a Uruguayan player who was also Uruguay's head coach from 2012 to 2015. During the 2015 Rugby World Cup, unfortunately, Uruguay was swept, so he, was booted out of Uruguay, went to Georgia for a spell, and then moved to Chile in 2018. Last couple games Chile's played, August 5th, they lost to Argentina 15, which is kind of like the Argentina Beast team. They're not the starters. They're mostly like the bench and younger players. They lost to them 40-13, just to show you how strong Argentina is. August 12th, they lost to Namibia, barely, 28-26. And then August 26th, they lost again to Argentina 15, 28-26 though this time. So they kind of came back in the rematch. But Chile definitely going to be the low team on this totem pole in Pool D. Some of the players to look out for: Martin Sigren, who is the team captain, 26 caps in the back row. He does play for a club in England. Rodrigo Fernandez, fly half, 22 caps. They have some very young, dynamic centers, Domingo Saavedra and Inaki Ariarza. Their fullback, Santiago Videla. He's the guy that kicked the penalty goal that ended up winning the game for Chile against USA. So Santiago Videla, definitely a clutch player for them. And of course, Thomas Ducelant, who is their experienced hooker with 36 caps. So that is Pool D. As I mentioned before, important games, England versus Argentina. Whoever wins that game more than likely will advance out of the pool. And then September 17th, England versus Japan. If Japan can beat England, really improves Japan's chances of making out of the pool play. Both of those games, team captain for England, Owen Farrell, will not participate in, so that might play a huge factor in the games. And then, of course, September 28th, Japan versus Samoa. If Japan does beat England, they have to beat Samoa. And like I mentioned, Samoa does have that recent win over Japan, and Samoa would love to play spoiler on the biggest stage of rugby. Again, Rugby World Cup starts this Friday. Every game you can watch live or on demand on the Peacock. It is taking place in France, so time zones are all over the place. So just check out Peacock for all the start times, especially on the West Coast. There's a lot of games that start at 4 a.m. in the morning, but again, you can watch it live or on demand. And yeah, that's our Pool D review. So as always, thank you very much for watching my video, and I'll see you on the pitch.